On June 13, 2018, a federal courtroom in Boston erupted with gasps as the prosecutor read aloud the charges that would later make headlines around the world. A billionaire pharmaceutical CEO had allegedly paid doctors cash, luxury vacations, and even hired strippers to push a highly addictive fentanyl spray onto patients who didn't need it. The story began 3 years earlier when John Kapoor, a charismatic Indian-born chemist turned entrepreneur, founded Insys Therapeutics with a single, audacious goal: to dominate the market for breakthrough pain management. In 2012, the company secured FDA approval for Subsys, a potent, rapid-acting fentanyl spray designed for cancer patients experiencing severe breakthrough pain. On paper, Subsys was a marvel, delivering a precise dose of one of the world's strongest opioids in a discreet, easy-to-use inhaler. In reality, the drug's price tag, often exceeding $5,000 for a single month's supply, turned it into a cash cow for the fledgling firm. From the outset, Insys faced a daunting hurdle: convincing doctors to prescribe a medication that was both expensive and, by regulation, limited to a narrow set of patients. Traditional sales tactics fell short. Kapoor, a man who believed that the only limit to success is the imagination of the entrepreneur, turned to a more insidious playbook. He assembled a team of medical science liaisons, whose job was not just to inform physicians but to persuade by any means necessary that Subsys was the answer to every patient's pain. What followed was a systematic bribery scheme that spanned the United States. Insys hired a network of sales representatives, many of whom were former doctors or medical students, to approach physicians with offers that blurred the line between professional courtesy and outright corruption. The incentives ranged from modest cash checks, sometimes as high as $5,000 per prescription, to lavish, educational trips to exotic locales, where doctors could relax on private beaches while sipping champagne. In some cases, the incentives took a darker turn: strippers, private jet rides, and even family vacations that left no question about the purpose of the gift. The company's internal documents, later uncovered during the investigation, reveal a chilling calculus. Each new Subsys prescription generated roughly $30,000 in revenue for Insys, while the cost of the bribe, whether cash or a night of entertainment, was a fraction of that amount. The more prescriptions a doctor wrote, the higher the payouts, creating a perverse incentive structure that rewarded quantity over patient need. Insys kept meticulous spreadsheets, labeling the payments as consulting fees, speaking engagements, or travel expenses, all designed to evade detection by auditors and regulators. The scheme began to unravel in late 2017 when a whistleblower, a former Insys sales manager, came forward with detailed records of the bribery program. The Department of Justice, already on high alert due to the nation's opioid crisis, seized the opportunity to investigate a company that seemed to be weaponizing the very drug that had already devastated countless families. A grand jury in Massachusetts returned an indictment that named John Kapoor, his son and chief operating officer Michael Kapoor, former CFO Michael D.R. Smith, and 3 physicians, Dr. Michael V.Z., Dr. Sumit K., and Dr. Andrew J., all accused of participating in a nationwide racketeering conspiracy. The trial, which opened in the summer of 2019, unfolded like a courtroom drama. Prosecutors presented a mountain of evidence: emails in which Kapoor bragged about getting doctors on board, spreadsheets tracking payments to each prescriber, and testimony from former Insys employees who described a corporate culture that celebrated closing the deal at any cost. The defense attempted to paint the payments as legitimate consulting fees, arguing that physicians were simply compensated for their expertise. Yet the jury saw a different picture when a former sales rep recounted how he had escorted a doctor to a private room where a stripper performed while the prescription paperwork was signed. After weeks of testimony, The verdict came down on October 23, 2019. John Kapoor was found guilty on 10 counts, including racketeering, conspiracy to commit healthcare fraud, and money laundering. He received a sentence of 5.5 years in federal prison, a fine of $1.5 million, and forfeiture of $300 million in assets. His son, Michael Kapoor, was sentenced to 3 years, while former CFO Michael Smith received 2.5 years. The three physicians were each convicted of conspiracy to commit healthcare fraud and sentenced to a minimum of 3 years, with the added stipulation that they lose their medical licenses. The courtroom erupted, not in applause, but in a sobering silence that reflected the gravity of a scheme that had helped fuel a national public health disaster. The fallout extended far beyond the courtroom walls. In the weeks after the verdict, Insys Therapeutics filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, its stock price crashing to pennies and erasing billions in shareholder value. The company's collapse sent shockwaves through the biotech industry, prompting other pharmaceutical firms to re-examine their compliance programs. The FDA, already under pressure to curb opioid overprescribing, issued a warning letter to Insys, demanding stricter controls on Subsys distribution and tighter monitoring of prescribing patterns. Meanwhile, state attorneys general launched parallel investigations, seeking civil penalties and restitution for patients who had been overprescribed the fentanyl spray. The victims of the scheme, patients who had been prescribed Subsys despite not meeting the stringent criteria for breakthrough cancer pain, found a measure of justice through civil settlements. In 2020, Insys agreed to a $225 million settlement with the U.S. Subscribe to the verdict for more stories like this.